Anyone that is sexually active should probably have a basic understanding about sexually transmitted infections. The problem is, there are a lot of myths and inaccurate information out there which can make this confusing. And I've definitely experienced this with treating patients with STIs in the clinic. From confusion about how they're spread, how they're treated, from toilet seats to hot tubs, there's all sorts of crazy information out there. So in today's video, we're going to debunk the top 10 myths about sexually transmitted infections. It's going to be a mythical one. So let's do this. And starting us off with myth number 10. And this is kind of an interesting one, but only trashy people get sexually transmitted infections? Sounds kind of judgy if you ask me, but yes, it is true that you can increase your risk of getting a sexually transmitted infection based on behavior. Like, for example, if you were to have multiple bouts of unprotected intercourse with multiple partners, that would increase your risk. But I have had patients come into the clinic from all walks of life and test positive and need treatment for STIs. These pathogens that cause these infections do not discriminate or care who you are. They don't care about socioeconomic status. They don't care about age, race, political affiliation, whether you're a Lakers fan or a Clippers fan. If you'll let them, they'll be more than happy to infect you. Myth number 9. If your partner has an STI, you'll know it. I kind of giggle with that because if that were true, we wouldn't be spreading these infections as easily as we do. Could you imagine the opposite? And the average person could more readily tell if their potential partner did have an STI and they're like, yeah, I think they've got an STI. Let's do it anyway. That's just not how this works, because if people knew more readily, they would probably avoid having intercourse with said person who was infected. And so I've definitely had patients come in who have had symptoms and tested positive, and also who have not had symptoms and still tested positive. And the reality is that the majority of sexually transmitted infections can be asymptomatic, or at least have some period of time where they're asymptomatic. And so symptoms are not giving us the total picture. They're just a piece of the puzzle. And this is why certain screening tools, such as testing, can be helpful. Myth number 8. Once you've had an STI, you can't get it again. Let me debunk this one with a story. I'm in the clinic one day, patient comes in, I go into the room and introduce myself, say, hi, I'm Jonathan, one of the medical providers, how can I help you? The patient says, well, I think I've got gonorrhea. And I said, well, tell me more about that. And the patient continues by saying, well, I've had gonorrhea and or chlamydia about 9 or 10 times, and this feels similar. Poker face comes on, we explored this a little bit more deeply, and this patient had in fact had these infections about that number of times with successful treatment. Now, we obviously did have a conversation about safe sex practices, but in these clinical situations, you can have two things happen at once. You can be very compassionate and understanding as a medical provider, but also say, we should probably get a handle on this. Now, this illustrates that, yes, you can get these infections more than once, especially these STIs that are caused by bacteria like chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, that we can successfully treat with antibiotics. But if the person gets exposed again, they can come down with the infection again. So it's not like you're going to develop lifelong immunity after you get one of these infections. Myth number 7. You can only have one sexually transmitted infection at a time. This is definitely not true, and even kind of builds off of our previous myth that we talked about, but it's not like chlamydia all of a sudden protects your body against other sexually transmitted infections, like it's in your body and being like, no, gonorrhea, you cannot come in here. This is only my body to infect. Go elsewhere. And I'm not sure why it was in a creepy voice, but you can definitely have these infections at the same time. Chlamydia and gonorrhea together. You could have HIV and herpes together, and other mixes and flavors of STIs. Probably shouldn't have described it as flavors, but you get the idea. You can have more than one sexually transmitted infection at the same time. Myth number 6. If you get tested and you are STI free, then your partner is in the clear and does not need to be tested. Well, we already have a pretty good idea of why this isn't true. Even if all of your tests came back negative, your partner could still potentially be asymptomatic, and you may not want to take that risk. So instead, you could do an STD check date night, because that would be super fun and the least awkward date you've ever been on. Myth number 5. You can avoid getting sexually transmitted infections by only participating in oral or anal intercourse. Oh goodness. These pathogens that cause these STIs also do not discriminate based upon the human orifice that you are engaging with. They can be spread by direct skin contact with, like the case of herpes and genital warts, direct contact with mucous membranes and bodily fluids. You can get gonorrhea in the throat from oral intercourse. And HIV, for example, is actually at higher risk of transmission with anal intercourse because the lining of the rectum and the anus is thinner and it can potentially tear more easily, allowing HIV to enter the body. So definitely want to participate in safe sex practices with all forms of intercourse. Myth number 4, birth control will protect you from getting an STI. Well, we probably need to clarify what we mean by birth control here, because if you're talking about use of a barrier method like a condom, that could help definitely reduce the risk, not 100%, but it helps protect you against contracting an STI. But most of the time when people are talking about this, they're referring to oral contraceptive pills or things like an IUD. And in that case, those forms of contraception will definitely not protect you against getting an STI. Myth number 3, you can't get an STI in a hot tub. And I need to be clear here before people start freaking out about going to a public pool or public hot tub. If you're just swimming around in a pool or relaxing in a hot tub, you're gonna be fine. We're talking about having actual intercourse in said hot tub. In that case, you'd have direct skin-to-skin contact, contact with mucous membranes, and even bodily fluids, and you could potentially contract an STI. Could you imagine people making out all heavily and getting to this point of no return where they're going to enter the abyss of consensual coitus, and one of them looks at the other and says, "Have you got a condom?" And the other says, "No, but I do have a hot tub. That should protect us." No. Myth number 2, if your partner pulls out, I'm going to actually not finish this sentence and actually rephrase it a little more scientifically. If your partner retracts penis from currently engaged orifice prior to climax, you can't get a sexually transmitted infection. We all know that is a myth based on everything that we've talked about before. All it takes is skin-to-skin contact with some STIs. Others do require mucous membrane contact, which obviously you're going to do with intercourse, even if climax isn't achieved. And even bodily fluids can be in contact because there's vaginal secretions. Even males have a bulbal urethral gland that will release secretions into the urethra and outside the body a little bit during arousal and therefore prior to climax. So in other words, climax not required. And myth number 1, this one's my favorite and I don't totally know why, but it's you can get an STI from a toilet seat. How is this getting perpetuated? Like when I'm in the clinic and I'm doing STI screenings with patients, I have to ask them all sorts of personal questions like, when was your last sexual encounter? Was it protected? Unprotected? Do you have any symptoms? Does your partner or any of your previous partners have any known symptoms? And then of course I look at them and I say, I've got a really serious question that I need to ask you now. Have you had any encounters with a suspicious toilet? We never ask that because it's not a concern. There's absolutely no evidence to suggest that you could get an STI from sitting on a toilet seat. Now, to be fair, it could possibly get perpetuated from the idea that urine might get on the toilet seat or maybe even some feces, but we've already kind of hashed out how these STIs spread. Direct skin-to-skin contact, mucous membranes, bodily fluids. These pathogens don't do well just surviving on random surfaces, and it's not like you're gonna plop down on a toilet seat and poof, you've got gonorrhea of the butt cheek. It's just not gonna happen. But next time you do encounter a suspicious toilet, you can do what I do, either hover or put some sort of barrier on it, not because you're worried about contracting an STI, but more for just general cleanliness. So now that we've spent all this time debunking myths about sexually transmitted infections, your mind may have started to wander to what it might be like to participate in good old-fashioned, wholesome, safe, consensual intercourse. But sometimes we think about intercourse a little too much. And when that happens to me, I think I may need to replace this with a different thought. And that's when I pull up my trusty Brilliant app, because Brilliant.org is an amazing interactive online learning platform for STEM subjects. It's one of the best ways to learn math, science, and computer science. And I recently started a course called Exploring Data Visually, which was extremely fun and interactive, yet challenging enough to help me refresh old skills as well as develop new ones. And if you think about it, the more effective you are at exploring and analyzing data, the more effective you could be at doing your own personal risk assessment for sexually transmitted infections. Even though we were trying to replace those thoughts with math, science, and computer science. But I guess the heart and genital structures want what they want. But regardless of those biological desires, Brilliant is constantly developing and releasing new courses each and every month. So you will definitely find lessons that are applicable to you no matter where you are on your educational journey. So if you're interested in becoming a little bit more brilliant, go to brilliant.org/IHA to start a free 30-day trial. Plus, the first 200 people will get 20% off their annual subscription. We'll also include that link and the information in the description below. And thanks for watching this video and all of our other crazy anatomy videos. We really appreciate the support. If you want to support the channel even more, you can like and subscribe if you're not already. Please leave some comments below. Let us know if there's some myths that you've heard about with STIs that we didn't cover in this video, and we can definitely have some fun discussions about that in the comments. And of course, we'll see you next time.